It is painful for me to say that my state is responsible for genocide. I do not say that happily. I said that with a great pain, not only as a socialist, humanist, Democrat, but also as a descendant of families that most of them were totally perished by the Nazis. So it breaks my heart, but that should be done. That's justice.
The death toll from the Israeli war on Gaza Strip has surged to 70,000 according to Gaza Health Ministry. With no sign of peace in foreseeable future, many have been pinning their hopes on domestic judicial investigation and persecution of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's corruption. However, the PM just submitted a request for pardon and did not promise to quit politics if he gets it. We knew Donald Trump has openly asked Israeli President for Netanyahu's preemptive pardon, just replied saying he would respect Donald Trump, but Israel is a sovereign state. To better understand what is going on and what will happen next, we have great honor to have Dr. Ofer-Kassif with us today, prominent figure in Israeli Parliament. Thank you for being here, Doctor.
Thank you very much.
So Netanyahu is asking for a pardon and he denies any wrongdoing. Trump previously invented twice to urge Israel to drop judicial proceedings against him. Many claim that only corruption sentence can truly end Israel's war on Gaza, as we have exhausted all diplomatic means. What's your opinion on this?
If I begin with the so-called pardon, this is actually not a request for pardon at all, because one has to understand the procedure and the law in Israel. In order to get a pardon in Israel, the rule says, and the law says, that one has either to be convicted by the court or admit to one's misdemeanor or crime, and just after that, and given that, can ask for a pardon. What actually Netanyahu did is not to ask for a pardon. This is a kind of a extortion, a blackmail, because what Netanyahu said in his letter to the president of Israel is that, in other words, if I quote from the Godfather film, if you happen to watch it, he made the president and the Israeli society as a whole, in fact, a suggestion that he or it cannot reject. That means, extortion by threats of violence. Because Netanyahu said, if you actually do not pardon me, or you do not cancel my trial, because this is the right concept, the language to use, cancellation of the trial, not pardon, for the reasons I mentioned before. If you don't do that, I'm going to take care that the current situation of growing violence, schisms within the society are going to go even to escalate. So this is actually extortion or blackmail, and this is not a request of pardon. And basically, and of course, I'm against any pardon to this corrupted person. On top of that, Netanyahu is first and foremost guilty, in my view, or at least should be investigated and charged in war crimes, including genocide in Gaza and ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, and turning Israel into a fascist regime. Those should be tried for in The Hague. And for that, he doesn't deserve and won't get ever any pardon. This is as far as this issue is concerned. As far as the Gaza situation is concerned, well, since the so-called ceasefire began, and I emphasize so-called because this is actually a sham. It is true that the death toll and the destruction, etc., starvation, is not to the same extent that it was in the 2 years before. But still, people have been killed in the last almost 2 months, I think, since the so-called ceasefire began. About almost 400 Palestinians, many children, again, in Gaza, were killed by the bombardment and shooting of Israel. The humanitarian aid that the Palestinians in Gaza are in need of are hardly, definitely not to the extent they need. They, hardly get it. And of course, the people are still live, in tents mostly because everything is in ruins. And we saw that 2 weeks ago, something like that, when there was a flood in some areas of Gaza, people found themselves as if they were in the middle of the sea. So the situation in Gaza is very, very grim and very, very grave. And of course, the responsibility is totally on Israel, because we have to understand, myself and my comrades, we were against the carnage committed by Hamas on October 7th, for sure. So that was a war crime and crime against humanity. We were against it from the very beginning. From the first second we heard and understood what happened. But that cannot justify whatsoever the further more criminal deeds, the genocide, the atrocities, the ethnic cleansing, the destruction of Gaza by Israel. And that has nothing to do with the security of Israel. To some extent, it has a lot to do with a pure, simple, vicious, sadistic revenge. But more than that, it is part of the realization of the so-called decisive plan that Smotrich introduced already in 2017. When this plan, which consists basically of three main points. First, that Israel should annex all occupied Palestinian territories without granting basic civil, political, and other rights to the Palestinian people. Second, those Palestinians who are not going to accept their status as a third and fourth and fifth, third class citizens or subjects are going to be expelled from their homeland. And third, those Palestinians who are going to resist are going to be killed. We saw and still see that in Gaza, Israel adopted the genocidal strategy as part of the elimination or expulsion of the Palestinian people from Gaza Strip, as part of this decisive plan. In the West Bank, there's been going on for years now, and especially in the last 2 years, and it still goes on. And even further, there's an ethnic cleansing committed by armed settler terrorists combined with the occupation forces. When within Israel, there is fascism runs rampant by legislation and by also controlling the media, the courts, etc., and using an hegemonic public discourse. All those are part of the very same decisive plan. And what's going on in Gaza is part of it, the most vicious one, but not the only one.
So many been counting on the pardon thing because the newly elected NY New York City Mayor Mandamni been claiming if Netanyahu was visiting in New York or landing in New York, he will immediately ask the police to arrest him or execute the arrest warrant. But now the President Herzog didn't yet show any stance on the pardon, and polls show 38% support the pardon and 43% oppose it. How do you think the pardon will unfold? Is it possible that some jurisdiction sentencing or further investigation on Netanyahu or his wife can possibly shed light on the current situation of Gaza?
First of all, if we stick to the law as is, the president of Israel cannot grant any pardon to Netanyahu as long as Netanyahu doesn't admit to the charges and expresses remorse. If he doesn't do both, he legally cannot get any pardon, and his request cannot be conceived or defined as a request for pardon at all, as I said before. So if the president of Israel clings to the law, he won't give him any pardon. If, alas, he does, I'm pretty sure that the Supreme Court will revoke it. And definitely you will see thousands of people in the streets against it. The majority of the people in Israel do not want Netanyahu to get a pardon. And those who support it and are not part of the herd that has been going astray after Netanyahu as part of their cult of personality, those who support it conditionally. And they say we may support a pardon to Netanyahu if he admits, expresses regrets, and immediately retires for good from any public official position. But he already said yesterday in a press conference, he said explicitly yesterday when he was asked, are you going to retire if you get a pardon? He said, no, and that's it. Obviously, there were and still are, but in the last 2 years, there have been so many atrocities, war crimes, and crimes against humanity in Gaza, as well as in the West Bank, but mainly in Gaza. We are dealing here literally with a genocide in accordance or according to the official international legal definitions. Raphael Lamkin, who was the attorney, the solicitor that actually defined and publicly introduced the definition and the concept of war crimes after the Holocaust, actually, according to what he said, and the government of Israel and those who were actually involved on the ground, they were involved in genocide. Netanyahu must be investigated for this. Not only him, the defense ministers and other ministers, members of Knesset and other public figures, including generals and some soldiers, must be investigated and tried. And it's unacceptable. For me, no state is above natural justice in international law. No state. It is a kind of hypocrisy, to say the least, to say I support international law and some kind of universal justice as long as it doesn't come to my own state or people. That's not serious. If you are really committed to international standards of universal justice and international law, so you are committed to stand against the government of your state and some other apparatuses of your own state and people if they violated the international law and basic universal morality. And there's no doubt that Netanyahu is there. So if he's investigated, I'm sure, and others, already, by the way, many soldiers that serve in Gaza already gave their own testimony to Breaking the Silence organization, if you know it, and they admitted to war crimes they committed. It's not something that I invented. I wish I could. It is painful for me to say that my state is responsible for genocide. I do not say that happily. I said that with a great pain, not only as a socialist, humanist, Democrat, but also as a descendant of families that most of them were totally perished by the Nazis. So it breaks my heart, but that should be done. That's justice.
Doctor, we know you've been posting the current situation for those being kicked out in West Bank and by the settlers. And in January, actually from January, IDF and Shin Bet destroyed buildings and infrastructure in Jenin, arresting many Palestinians, many of whom are descendants of those displaced in 1948. And recently, IDF shot 2 surrendering Palestinians, and they even killed defenseless kids, and a commander was promoted even. So earlier, IDF killed 3 Hebrew-speaking Israelis. They yelling, help me, Hebrew, but still got killed. How do normal Israelis view this incident, and what are their thoughts now?
It's very unfortunate for me, and again, painful to say that it seems that the majority within the Israeli Jewish public, not everybody, of course, and I cannot say it's 90 or 80%, but I'm afraid that 60, 70 for sure. But it's very dynamic, you know. Public opinion, by definition, changes sometimes very rapidly in matters of hours. I can give you examples from the past and history in the world in general and within Israel as well. But at the moment, it seems that the majority supports this carnage and supports the genocidal policy of this government. And it's disgusting, it is heartbreaking, and it is most of all criminal and should be treated. One day, they will be treated. One day, our beliefs in humanity, in justice and equality for all, for Jews and Palestinians and others alike, we shall prevail. I'm sure about it. The question is how much time it should take, and unfortunately, how many people are going to pay for this, and how much blood is going to be spilled because of this postponed, a delay in getting or achieving the right solution, which is a Palestinian liberation. Palestinian statehood alongside the state of Israel. That's the only solution. We are struggling for that. And it's very important for me to say, for you and for the viewers and listeners, that I in person and my comrades and friends at the Knesset and outside of the Knesset, we've been accused systematically in being anti-Israeli. We are not against Israel. This is a struggle for the character of Israel as well. It is indeed out of justice. The same universal justice I was talking about before. So it does come out of the right of the Palestinian people to its own statehood and liberation, for sure. But it will also serve the interest of Israel, not only by getting peace and security, but also, and perhaps most of all, by changing the public discourse and hegemonic belief from pure hatred and racism to something which is much more moral, just, and sane. So this is a struggle, a twofold struggle for the Palestinians and for the Israelis. This is not a zero-sum game. This is a win-win or lose-lose situation. Either both peoples lose or both people win. The only way for both people to win is by ending the occupation, liberating the Palestinian people, and changing the Israeli society into a real democratic, liberal, egalitarian society.
So since taking office, Netanyahu's coalition has included far-right parties and far-right figures like...
Netanyahu's party is a far-right party. Excuse me for interrupting. I want to say it's very clear because many people believe that Netanyahu has been under pressure and extorted by figures, by racist, fascist figures like Ben Gvir and Smotrich. That's untrue. Netanyahu knows exactly what he's been doing. He wants people to believe that he's been led by others, but he actually leads everything. He is responsible for any bit or for any word and deed and action. He knows exactly what he's doing and is responsible for the carnage. He's responsible, by the way, also for the negligence of the Israeli hostages and the sacrifice of them and the Israeli soldiers on top of the 70,000 Palestinians that were butchered, mostly civilians in Gaza, and another 1,000 in the West Bank in the last 2 years, etc., etc. So Netanyahu turned the Likud party, which was never my cup of tea, to say the least. It was not a fascist, racist in the sense of true belief in racial theory. It was not like that. It had some liberal components. Netanyahu transformed the Likud party into a full-fledged fascist and racist movement. And so most of the senior figures in the Likud party, within the Knesset for sure, but outside of the Knesset as well, are no different from Ben Gvir and Smotrich. Actually, they are very, very similar.
Well, that's new to me. When you support South Africa sue Israel in Hague, many of our viewers say we're gonna invite you to our show and hear what you think about Smotrich and Ben Gvir. But you say those higher big figures in Likud are somewhat similar to them, then it's really different.
Some of them are similar or identical. Some of them are worse. The vice speaker of the Knesset, one of them from the Likud, his name is Nissim Vaturi, he said publicly in an interview to the television a few weeks ago that the interest of Israel is that there will be no Arabs here at all. 1 year ago, he said, and I quote him, I'm quoting, it's not an interpretation, his own words. He said that the men of Gaza should be separated from the children and women and shot down. That's someone who is a senior member of the Knesset with the Likud, is the vice speaker of the Knesset. If you want to see how the situation has been deteriorating and how bad it is, when I submitted a complaint to the ethics committee, which suspended me for much less than that, if there was any comparison at all, for 10 months altogether in the last 2 years, when I submitted a complaint against him because he said that those men should be killed, the ethics committee refused to deal with it, and they said this is part of his ideology. So you can see that even the ethics committee, which consists of 4 members of the Knesset, 2 from the coalition and 2 from the opposition, I am suspended now as well, again. For another 2 months, it ends towards Christmas. But altogether, in the last 2 months, I've been suspended 10 months, mainly because I insisted in struggling against the genocide and atrocities in Gaza, as well as other atrocities in the West Bank. And because of that, because of words I said, because I said that there are war crimes, because I said there was a genocide, those are the reasons I've been suspended in the only democracy in the Middle East.
Well, in a recent interview with Tucker Carlson, Qatar's Prime Minister emphasized that Doha's humanitarian aid to Palestinians in Gaza, including its dialogue and mediation efforts with Hamas, has been fully transparent to both the US and Israel. He noted that Netanyahu has long been aware of Qatar's actions and even requesting Doha's involvement in certain cases. As we interviewed Professor Joe Bainey from Stanford, he argues that Netanyahu himself contributed to Hamas' growth by allegedly leveraging the group to intermediate Israeli citizens for political gain. So many neutral Israeli citizens share this view now, accusing Netanyahu for fostering.
Look, everybody knows about it. Before the massacre of 7 October, for years, Netanyahu, as a prime minister, was responsible for transforming millions of dollars directly in suitcases, like a mob system, not even through a bank account or BIT, but or PayPal, or something, PayPal. He was responsible in person to transfer money in millions of dollars, cash, from Qatar to Hamas in Gaza. Everybody knows about it. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's not my illusions or hallucinations. You need not even be a radical leftist like myself in order to say that. Even people who are part of the right wing, but out of the Likud say so, and know that. So he actually supported literally the Hamas. A friend of mine, whose son was 2 years in captivity, was a hostage in the hands of Hamas, he said, just after his son was kidnapped, he said, Netanyahu financed the tunnels where my son is being held. And that's literally true. Everybody knows about it. Netanyahu, in addition to the crimes I mentioned before, and it's not only him, it's going to be a terrible mistake, or to go astray if we just, restrict our criticism and grudge to Netanyahu. We must see that it's wider. Because some people believe that the only opposition should be a personal one. Just get rid of Netanyahu, put someone else instead of him, and everything's fine. That's not the case. Netanyahu is a great danger, and the senior criminal, but he's not the only one. Far from that. But so that's why we need an opposition in the sense of changing the policy, not only the figures or Netanyahu himself. But as I began to say, everybody knows, and Netanyahu is not only a war criminal and the criminal in crime and guilty in crimes against humanity, etc., etc. He's not only a systematic liar. He is also a manipulator that knows how to manipulate the so-called masses for his own benefit. And that's one of the main problems, that he's been doing the worst things, not only to the Palestinians, but to the Israelis. He literally is guilty in the death of more than 2,000 Israelis on top of the 70,000 Palestinians and more. He is responsible. He's been knowingly and consciously sacrificing Israeli soldiers and the hostages who were dying in agony in the hands of Hamas in Gaza, only to stay in power. But he still succeeds in manipulating the public discourse. And many people, though not the majority, but a huge minority, believes what he says. And although those are sheer lies, that's the main, target. That's the main challenge we have to confront. And that's the toughest one. And the indication is that if you look at the polls, because we are supposed to have elections in 1 year, in 10 months, you can see that the Likud party under Netanyahu is still the biggest one in most of the polls. That's insane. That's insane.
So, Doctor, we know you've made incredible efforts to call out Netanyahu and his extreme group's war crimes, facing immense political pressure and even physical attacks. When Trump visited Knesset in October and delivered his speech, you publicly protested against both Trump and Netanyahu on site, only to be forcibly removed by them. And many international leftists and the media feel the prolonged conflict and constant violence have made the public numb or even tired of the daily tragedy. Some say even high-profile actions like what you did and the European MPs joining the global Sumud flotilla seem to have limited impact, leading to a sense of helplessness and escapism. Could you share your personal journey and offer some guidance for these disheartened people?
First of all, I must agree that it is a very limited impact, but the impact exists. Even if it's limited, it's better than nothing. And it's also a matter of values. It should not be evaluated solely in accordance with the results or consequences, but also as an action in itself. I felt obliged to do so for one basic reason. Apart, even more, getting the words attention, even if for a while. And this is that Trump is conceived by many, especially in Israel, but also globally, as the savior. They forgot that he's in person responsible for the prolonged butchery in Gaza, including the sacrifice of the Israeli hostages, because when Israel violated the ceasefire agreement that was already there in March, Trump allowed him to do so. Trump didn't stop this breach. He didn't say to Netanyahu and his government, there is an agreement that you already signed and you are committed to it and you should respect it. We allowed Israel to violate the agreement, not only rhetorically, but also by sending arms, by vetoing the decision in the Security Council of the United Nations against the continuation of the genocide. So Trump is a great part of the problem, not the solution. And people sometimes, it seems that people across the world, especially in Israel, have such a short sight or memory that suddenly they think that he's the solution, that Trump is the savior. No, he's not. The only reason that he came in October, it was, I think, or September, I don't remember now, and forced Netanyahu to reach an agreement was because of the failed assassination of Israel in Doha. And because I guess some of Trump's advisors told him that the conduct of the Israeli government is against the interest of the United States. It's not because Trump cared for the lives of Palestinians or the Israeli hostages. He's a businessman. He thinks only about everything as a business. And it was the same here. He's responsible for at least 6 months genocidal war in Gaza, including the death in agony of Israeli hostages. Let's not forget that. That was the main message I wanted to make when I raised this sign. In addition, of course, to recognize Palestine, because that's the only way to promise a good future for the next generations of both Palestinians, Israelis, and the whole region. Because if the situation continues, it's going to spread far beyond Israel/Palestine and far beyond the region. It may easily slide into another world war, because just imagine what happens if something blows up in Al-Aqsa, in Jerusalem, and we are very close to that, I'm afraid. So I'm trying to say, when I meet international figures, I always try to tell them that apart from being evil, the oppression of the Palestinian people and the atrocities against them everywhere, in Gaza, in the West Bank, and including the so-called, what I call fascism within Israel, on top of being evil, it is also against the interest of the whole world, because it's going to explode, it's going to erupt. It cannot stay like that forever. How much time do you think that the Palestinians who've been dispossessed, expelled and killed and shot, and their houses been demolished on a daily basis, their trees and fields have been burnt down on a daily basis? How much time do you think the Palestinian people can stay still without doing anything? That cannot be like that forever. And I'm afraid, I'm terrified of another 7 October and the aftermath. But if something like that happens, alas, the whole world is going to pay for it, because it's going to spread very rapidly. It's not Gaza.
Good news for you, Doctor, is millions of Chinese youths, especially those well-educated, have no fantasy on Trump or Netanyahu being savior. We imagine Trump hoping his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, to build Gaza a huge mall and maybe golf playgrounds after expelling all Gazans to Egypt. So what's your outlook on the future of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
I dare say that in the short term, I'm very pessimistic. I'm afraid that we are going to see a lot of bloodbath of Palestinians and Israelis alike. I hope I'm mistaken. I want to be mistaken. But it seems to me that if there's no radical change, a real metamorphosis of the policy of the Israeli government, as I just said, sooner or later it's going to explode, and I'm terrified of what's going to happen. In the long term, I'm quite optimistic, because, as I said, it cannot consist like that. It cannot continue like that. And because of that, I'm pretty sure that we are closer to a Palestinian liberation and Palestinian statehood in all territories Israel occupied in 1967, more than we ever were. But I'm afraid that and again, I want to be mistaken, I'm afraid that many people are going to pay a huge price before we reach there. And our attempt is to make this future come sooner, because it will save a lot of lives. And I hope we'll succeed. But it's very difficult, because, we can even hardly speak. As I said, I've been suspended in the last 2 years for almost half of the time, simply because of things I said. And there are new complaints against me because of things I tweeted or posted or said. And there's a great chance that I'm going to be suspended further. So I cannot even work properly. And this is part of the problem. All those three, angles of the unholy trinity, the genocide in Gaza, the ethnic cleansing, and the West Bank and fascism within Israel, are connected. One cannot be detached from the other. And in order to solve the three of them, first and foremost, we have to end the occupation.
For all the eminent leaders and scholars, you're the first Israeli guest on our channel. What message would you like to share with our audience for over 10 million young Chinese viewers?
First of all, I want to thank you for listening. That's the most important thing. Secondly, we need your help. We need the international community as a whole, and especially you. We need your help in getting rid of this criminal government and of getting rid of the occupation, which has been murderer number one in the world. And we need it for both peoples. As I said, it's a win-win situation ending the occupation. It will serve both Palestinians and Israelis. And by the way, in the end, it will serve China. It's an interest of China too.